welcome to the Screen Podcast. We're going behind the headlines to offer you insight and analysis of the global film industry. My name is Wendy Mitchell. I'm a contributing editor at Screen. I'm joined as usual by Screen's editor-in-chief, Matt Mueller, and deputy editor Louise Tutt. Hi, Matt and Louise.
Hi, Wendy.
And Louise and I are actually on the road this week, joining from the San Sebastian Film Festival, where we're going to feast on films and pinchos, I hope. So we've got a packed episode today. We'll start by talking about how European producers are sharing their worries about the future of the Creative Europe funding program. And as Screen unveils its annual exciting UK and Ireland Stars of Tomorrow today, our reporter Ellie Calnan is talking to James McAvoy. He's walking down memory lane with us, reminiscing about when he was a Star of Tomorrow back in 2004. Finally, we're going to talk to Screen's America's editor, Jeremy Kay, about some TIFF 25 highlights, and look ahead to what could happen when TIFF Market comes to Toronto in 2026. So, Matt and Louise, first we're going to talk about a big story that's kind of bubbling up in Europe. Earlier this week, here in San Sebastian actually, 24 different producers groups published an open letter. They were expressing their concerns about the plans for the next incarnation of Creative Europe. Just to explain for listeners who aren't that familiar, Creative Europe is the EU's audiovisual support program. It's been going for nearly 35 years, and it's really a bedrock of finance for European films. I guarantee if you're seeing a European film at Cannes or Venice or somewhere, it's probably going to have a Creative Europe logo on it or the media program. There's a subsection there. Creative Europe is up for renewal. This iteration will end in 2027. There's going to be something new called Agora EU, and the proposals that have been emerging have been concerning people. It's not really the level of money. Creative Europe currently offers 2.5 billion euros, and that was from 21 to 27. The proposed Media Plus will be 3.2 billion euros for 2028 to 2036. The wider Agora EU is being proposed at 8.6 billion euros, so this is substantial money. The big concern is how the money will be spent. Right now, it's ring-fenced for films and audiovisual content, which is great. But in the new incarnation, it's also, that same pot of money is also going to support news media and journalism and other pro-democracy initiatives. Obviously, this is very important, but producers really want to know exactly how it's going to work. Can we narrow the focus back down to audiovisual work or ring-fence a little pot of this for films? So, the producers are also questioning that there's no criteria at the moment being said for independent companies being the ones to get the funding, nor saying where they have to be based. So could Netflix or Disney or some behemoth suddenly access this money? Matt, I know you've been looking at this. Our colleague Tim Dams wrote a great piece about this open letter. Matt, what do you think is going on, and what's worrying about this?
Well, I think there's kind of a lot to unpack, because Creative Europe is such a, as you say, such a big and substantial program for the European film industry. It's been such a bedrock for the entire European screen audiovisual industries since, the 90s. It's probably really helped build what the current European film industry is. I think one thing that's important to note, I'm not surprised at all that these groups have got together to issue a letter of protest, but one thing I think that is important to note is that Creative Europe and media do not actually support production, so they're actually more about helping films travel beyond national borders and find audiences in other countries. So, I mean, the real sort of foundational kind of like thinking behind it was for different countries to be able to let their films travel to other parts of Europe and to therefore find wider audiences. But one thing it does do is it offers development slate funding and co-production slate funding. So, for instance, a company like Element Pictures has been very, upfront about how much Creative Europe media funding they've had over the years to help them build their slate of projects, which of course includes all of Yorgos Lanthimos' films. And also when you sort of see a film that breaks out, like as an Anatomy of a Fall, often what helps that film travel is the fact that the Creative Europe funding for distribution, of which Anatomy of a Fall got 1 million euros, probably for around that amount, that's what helped these films travel beyond kind of their national borders. So it's not production specific, but at the same time, you could argue it just helps the whole production ecosystem, and that's why I think why people are concerned. And I think where you're looking at the the sort of decision to potentially split that money between audiovisual screen sectors and also news media journalism. There's more money in the pot for sure, but what they haven't sort of specified so far is how much is going to go to the audiovisual sectors. And I think that's why people are a little bit concerned because that hasn't been specified yet.
Yeah, I would just echo that what you said about, I think the development funding that people get from Creative Europe or media, that's where I think it makes a huge impact to help producers be able to develop some of these more artistic projects. Louise, what are some of your thoughts about this? And, there's a lot of challenges facing producers right now, and they don't need this headache.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons why producers are reacting very strongly to this and reacting as early as possible is it's part of a bigger conversation about the diminishing value of independent producers by the rest of the industry. I mean, just look at how many vanity producer credits there are now on films and TV series by people, it's fair to say, have not done the hard graft of putting that project together. And I think the ease with which those credits are handed out really enrages producers. One of the stories that's gained a lot of traction on screen recently is Tim's story about the European Producers Club and how it's campaigning for producers to be invited to film festival and award ceremonies where their films are being recognised. And we know festivals are struggling with their own funding issues, but producers are often the ones that have spent years and years putting that project together and acquiring the rights and, attaching a writer, attaching a director, the cast, raising the money, running the whole affair like a small manufacturing business and often with very little funding. And, producers, it's quite funny. They often say that many in the wider industry almost don't know what they do. I mean, and I do speak a lot to them in the UK industry. Maybe it's UK specific, but I doubt. And they say it's incredible how many think they are just like studio bosses with their own pots of cash, and they're not. Well, I mean, some of the bigger ones do have money, of course, but I think the important thing here is the European industry needs independent producers. They're really vital to give voice to a plurality of viewpoints and stories. And as Matt says, this creative media funding is really vital to what they do. And, without it, it's just another way of, knocking the knees out from independent production companies. Producers who are first into a project, often putting their own money in, to close the financing.
Deferring their fees. There's so many things that could go wrong.
And then they're the last to get paid, decades later. And creative media, certainly for the Europeans, is a wonderful bulwark and a wonderful support. And obviously UK producers can access it through co-production. I think that it's also important to say that there's a lot of unknowns in this, and I think that's why the producers are getting together and being very clear about it now, and it is clarity that's needed. And when you talk about the big companies that could be able to access the money, I'm really very sure that they will. A company like Netflix is rightfully very clever at accessing every funding avenue it can. And what this obviously means is they'll just be less available to the true indies.
I think that's what the concern is that they've been so unclear when they say it's going to be open to non-EU companies, what exactly that means. And I think the interpretation, until they clarify, is that they want companies like Media One. That's a big French production and distribution powerhouse, but it is effectively kind of backed and owned by a US private equity player, KKR, and they had a situation in 2022 where Leonine, which they now own, they bought that last year, wasn't able to access EU funding because it was also backed by KKR. So I think what they're trying to do, the EU, is they want to create more companies of scale. And again, this is where probably independent producers are a bit concerned because the direction of travel seems to be more towards creating bigger players who can compete in the international landscape against the US giants and less towards the sort of art house independent production that probably has traditionally been supported. So that clarity doesn't exist now. I think they will define that more, but there definitely seems to be a mood in the European Commission to build more support for bigger companies and to try to create bigger players in the marketplace.
I would refer everybody listening to go back and read Tim Dams's story that really details what these producers are now asking for. That's on Screen Daily. Matt and Louise, I should also mention that, we're going to be looking at challenging times for producers, and a lot of what Louise is saying at the forthcoming Screen Summit in London. This is happening at BFI South Bank on September 30th. There are a final few tickets available at screenfilmsummit.com. But Louise, do you want to talk about how much we're going to hear from producers or some of their issues coming out at that summit?
In the UK, independent producers are having a really hard time. I mean, the independent film tax credit has done a really good job at helping get lots of projects off the ground, including, quite big ones like, Nick Heitner's The Caller, which was just at Toronto. And but producers are still having to defer their fees. They're still having to put their own money in to get these films made. I mean, they're really struggling. And the original film tax relief and now the IFTC was designed to go to producers. It was meant to be so that producers could build their companies, and it just doesn't work out like that. I mean, one of the issues that we're going to be discussing is about the difficulty of keeping productions going during the pre-production process. There's a real desire for financiers to be a bit braver, to come in a bit earlier, because otherwise it's producers putting their own money in and taking the risk at that stage. And there's a call for like the banks, for the headgears, for the people to help producers out a bit more, because I think that the health of the independent production sector is really crucial to the entire global film industry.
Oh, for sure. And just to mention, is that Screen is always looking out for new talent, figuring out who's on the horizon. Today, at screendaily.com, you can meet the new 2025 UK and Ireland Stars of Tomorrow. This is a must-read to know who's on the rise. Matt, any of those stars you want to just give a little shout-out to, or do people just need to go meet them all at once online?
Well, once again, it's such an exciting showcase of talent. I mean, this has been going for 22 years now. Singling out the sort of, the rising actors, writers, producers, directors in the UK and Ireland who are making their mark in the industry, or about to make their mark in the industry. And it's it's one of our favorite things to do. And it's such a brilliant showcase. And we've had so many great names over the years, of course. I mean, I won't even list them. You can find them all on screendaily.com. But yes, this year, just to name a few, I mean, one name will be familiar to many people already, which of course is Owen Cooper, who of course was so outstanding in the Netflix series Adolescence and is fresh off a Primetime Emmy win for that performance, and is currently shooting a role as the young Heathcliff in Emerald Fennell's version of Wuthering Heights. So he's definitely one to look out for, probably the youngest of this year's stars. But other names on this year's list include Jade Crute, who's had roles in Ramon Gavris's Toronto premiere, Sacrifice, and he's also in the upcoming The Death of Robin Hood with Hugh Jackman. Sadie Soverall, who played a university student in Saltburn and now has the lead in Working Title's upcoming romantic comedy CC Emily. And just to name one of the filmmakers, writer-director Ted Evans, whose debut feature Retreat was told entirely in British Sign Language, was part of the BFI and British Council's Great 8 showcase in Cannes, and just premiered at TIFF. So those are just a few of the names to look out for, but head over to screendaily.com to get the full list of 20.
Wendy and I will raise a slice of Basque cheesecake.
Yes, in their honor. Matt and Louise, thank you so much. I will see you at the Screen Summit. And yeah, let's keep following all these stories. Like we said, we know this Creative Europe deal is not a done deal yet. We're hoping that some clarity emerges, and we'll keep following that story. And now we're going to go to our reporter, Ellie Calnan, who is talking to a former Screen star of tomorrow, who is very much a star of today. This is James McAvoy, reminiscing about his early career back in 2004, also talking a bit about his directorial debut feature, California Schemin.
Excellent. Hello, James. Thanks so much for coming on the Screen podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So you were selected as a Screen Star of Tomorrow back in 2004, which was actually the first year we did Stars of Tomorrow. I'm curious, what do you sort of remember from that experience of being selected?
It was slightly abstract, and a lot of the thing in a way that a lot of things that happen to actors are, where your agent phones you and tells you something, and you go, what is that? I guess that's cool. That's amazing. I don't really know what it is. And I'm not trying to be aloof or cool here. And then she went, well, you know the magazine that's in all the casting directors' offices, and every time you come to the agency, it's in the waiting room there, and it's on the desk, and you look at it and you go, God, those movies look cool. I hope I'm in some of them one day. She's like, it's that magazine. And I was like, oh my God.
And what sort of impact do you think being a star of tomorrow had on your career back then?
I remember feeling for maybe the first 7, 8, 9 years of my career like I was hanging on and I was not assured of my place in the industry. And I think actually I could have felt a little bit more assured earlier in my career with the work that I was doing and everything that I'd built up. But nonetheless, it took me a good long time. But I do remember around about that time, it was like a certain little nod of validation from the industry. But nonetheless, it's like an acknowledgement of potential, but you've then got to go and do something with it, you know. But I think it probably had an effect. I think it probably had, you know, what did I have at that point? I think I was in Shameless, and I was in, but in terms of Hollywood, I was probably in Last King of Scotland, which hadn't come out yet, The Chronicles of Narnia, which hadn't come out yet. So it was probably a little bit of help for studios and people who are concerned about your the figure, the number that you represent, all those things. And in lieu of a time where there was social media, where now people can go like, all right, we ain't sure about this kid, and we know they've got the talent, but nobody knows them. What are they doing for us in terms of bums on seats or purchases on a streamer? And then they go, oh, but hey, he's got 2.5 million followers on Instagram. Do you know what I mean? That, but in lieu of having anything like that back then, something like this, I think, had a massive, massive, massive attraction, or maybe not attraction, but a massive bit of influence over the kind of person who was maybe going to hire me. And that little nod of validation from the industry as well, which can be hard to feel like you're getting, especially if you're doing lower budget stuff that isn't getting seen in big cinemas, isn't getting big box office returns, isn't going on TV. You're doing these independent things that might go to festivals and are seen by people who are arty, but maybe not, I don't know, commercially as successful. So a little bit of a nod of validation from the industry actually meant a lot to me.
And I actually this morning dug out the copy, the magazine itself from the 2004. Well, it was a digital edition, and there was a little bit of an interview with you. And you said this quote: "I always remind myself that films exist for a story to be told, not for an actor to practice acting."
Said that then.
Is that something you remember as being like particularly important to you back then? Is it so important to you now? Do you even remember saying it?
I see it now, like I've only it's taken me 30 years of acting to kind of come to that realization. I didn't realize that I was already just saying the same old stuff when I was 24 years old. Well, look, I like that. I like that I said that back then. I wouldn't have. God, that's interesting, isn't it? We never really change. I'm still like that. I still say that. I
Wise
don't.
beyond your years.
Well, I don't know. It works for. It's given me a nice career, that approach. Like, there's other actors who I think don't do that and who do a totally different thing, and it's a bit more. I don't know about them or the craft or whatever. This sounds like I'm being roundabout complimentary. I'm not. The work they do is exceptional, and they don't need to approach it that way. The way I see it is like we're not. I'm not an actor. You're not a director. You're not a DOP. You're not a costume designer. You're none of those things first. You're a storyteller first, and then you can specialize in your department, and I specialized in the acting department. But your first job as a storyteller, your first job isn't an actor. So I've always thought along those lines, and yes, I've probably refined it a little bit, but it is really funny to hear that, yeah, 22 years ago I was still saying the same old shit.
And I guess sort of shifting gears, you've obviously just premiered your directorial debut, California Scheming. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
And actually several of the young actors in that film are also screen stars of tomorrow, albeit a bit more recently. We've got, Samuel Bottomley was in 2023. Lucy Halliday, who I actually interviewed myself, was in 2024. And then Seamus McLean-Ross, who was a rising star of Scotland, which is sort of our Scottish offshoot of Stars of Tomorrow in 2024. How different do you think it is for a young actor entering the industry now compared to when you sort of entered 20, 25, 30 years ago?
I think the main obstacle, or not the main obstacle. I think the main task is the same. That's the same. The job is essentially the same, but the stuff around it, the stuff that I think the stuff that you do when you're not in front of a camera and you're not on stage is different, and that's really hard. And I've got no experience of it, so I can't really speak to it too much. But I do know that the life of an actor is different. The amount of self-tapes that are done these days is huge. Like it used to be, I would go, I was very lucky. I had a good agent who believed in me and believed that I was right for stuff and was really putting me out there. So I was very lucky that whether I was getting work or not, I was actually getting to do the work of an actor, which is running about London, pop into a different casting director's office every day, sometimes twice a day, 5 days a week, getting rejected, getting some love, but still getting rejected, not getting any love, making directors cry, famous directors cry, hugging me, telling me I've got the part, and then they never call my agent. Like all that stuff was like teaching me. And it was teaching me within a community of people shaking hands, hugging, just even being rejected by somebody in the room. You were in the room. And I know that that's changed so much because of the technology's availability, the pandemic, and how the industry pivoted. And what I regret and I'm sad for young actors is, and not just young actors, older actors who are also having to engage in this, but and because they even maybe got it worse because they remember a time when it was different. But the lack of community that you get the opportunity to build upon there, and the literally going out to do your job feeling that you get when, even though you're not getting paid for it and you might not get the part, you were an actor that day. You went out and you acted. And there's something different about staying in your house and doing it on your phone. You know, there's something less. There's something less. I don't know. I don't know. Young actors might disagree with me. They might be like, "Nope, I feel utterly gratified and rewarded, and I love every self tape." But and I haven't been across the threshold in my house in 4 days. But it's just a bit more isolated. And in an industry where it's easy to feel isolated anyway. It's just another opportunity or another sort of mechanism for community taken away from us. Do you know what I mean? And so that's one of the things I feel sad about. But also there's ultimately the key role is not changed. You're a storyteller. You get to go and pretend to be somebody else. You get to go and try and make sense of the human experience. You get to try and make people laugh and cry, shock them and hurt them, and make them feel better again. And that is the gift that is still there. So it's not all bad. I'm not just slagging off the way things are now. The key job, if you can get out of your house after a self-tape, is going to be the same.
Yeah, absolutely. And you sort of mentioned social media earlier, and I guess maybe certain pressure in casting to cast, actors based on their social media followings. Is that something you've kind of experienced yourself as a director, or is it something
No,
you're actively trying to stay away from?
I mean, really, the story I wanted to tell from my first film had two young Scottish guys as the leads, maybe 20, 21, 22, maybe as young as 18, as old as 25. I could probably have stretched in terms of casting age. And as such, when you look at that sort of group of actors from Scotland, there's nobody really that's leaping out at you as a big, huge star already, or somebody who's pulling in millions on social media. So I was kind of by nature the the roles as written and as they were, 'cause it's based on a true story, it's sort of liberated me from that concern a little bit. But I am aware that it is something that they pay attention to now. But it was nothing I had to pay attention to. And, I've got to say thank you to my producers as well, who at one point, the term stunt casting was thrown in by one particular producer. And I was like, the minute somebody said that, I was like, I don't know what that means. And do we need a stunt supervisor for it then? I was like, no chance. And nobody really pushed me to. I was sort of gently sort of ushered towards a couple of people for certain roles that it was thought would maybe help cast some extra eyes in the film. But ultimately, when it came down to who I thought was going to give the audience the best viewing experience, and help us tell the story as well as possible. There was never any argument. Everybody was in agreement. So I was very lucky, but I am aware that it can be like that these days.
Mm. And you mentioned there wasn't a big sort of famous Scottish actor of that age range that you felt was sort of right for the role. Do you
Maybe
think?
am I completely blind? Is there somebody out there that you're like,
I mean, I can't
what
think of
about so
anything
and
that
so?
comes to mind, but I'm sure that there is out there. But I guess,
No.
I know it was important to you to sort of tell a Scottish story. How do you kind of see the nurturing of Scottish talent at the moment?
No Screen Scotland have got their new filmmaking initiative that they want to be rolling out over
Mm.
primary schools and secondary schools, and I think that's wonderful. But that isn't just for acting; that's just for filmmaking all over. Um, I really don't know. I couldn't tell you, but I think that the nurturing of Scottish talent. I don't even know if it's important to nurture talent. It's just important to expose people to the arts, and then people with talent will come out of that. It's really important to expose everyone, untalented people, to the arts because it enriches their whole outlook on life, and the benefits are untold. The benefits go way beyond creating artists. It creates people who can see beyond their barriers, their boundaries, and it creates people who have empathy and understand what it's like to walk in someone else's shoes. That's literally what acting is. You know what I mean? In terms of Scottish talent, what would nurture Scottish talent is more Scottish films and more Scottish television getting made. And I don't really think there's enough to satisfy the cultural diet of the Scottish person. I don't think there's a balanced diet, um, like a good sort of all food groups provided within the industry for what we need to see ourselves represented, diagnosed, dissected, accused, glorified, and just ripped apart comedically as well. Like you need all of it, and I just don't think we have that, which is really, really sad. So I'm Scottish. I wanted my first film to be about people from a background like mine, not just from Scotland, but from a kind of council estate that like I recognised. But I also wanted it to be funny and entertaining and kind of mainstream and aspirational, even though it's a true story with a pretty sad end. But Scottish film needs everything else. It needs the gritty drama, it needs the comedy, it needs a superhero film, it needs this, that, the next thing. We get one or two particular kinds of films that, to be honest with you, I don't even feel the Scottish people are particularly inspired to go and see.
Mm.
So it's not like the theatres are overflowing with Scottish people going to see Scottish films. So something's not right.
You've obviously been in the industry as an actor for a while, but I'm curious if there's something that surprised you to learn the most about the industry as a director and making your own film. If there's something that you had never been exposed to before that you're like, wow, I can't believe this is a thing.
I think I had always been aware of how difficult it is to make. I thought I was always aware of how difficult it was to make independent cinema, and then I made an independent film, my mind was blown um, at the levels of difficulty that it goes to. That thank God actors are sort of just don't even need to concern themselves with, and are kind of kept, oftentimes, not every time, oftentimes kept away from. I think actors, everybody's so focused on the act of being relaxed and being able to give of themselves and not have the stress of everybody else's day running through them at that time. So you keep them away from it. Anyway, so I was kind of shielded from a lot of that in the industry, and then I make a film, and it was just, I mean, the logistics and the crazy merry-go-round of finance in independent cinema is nuts, and it relies on a few things. It relies on lots of things. It relies on miracles. It relies on um, people having faith, just like taking a leap. It's a gamble for financiers. It relies on the blood, sweat, commitment, and tears sometimes of the kind of crew members who are committed to that kind of filmmaking process, because it's not comfy. And no, in filmmaking isn't, you know what I mean? You're working crazy hours, and you're working in crazy conditions and all that kind of stuff. And that can be, I think that can be abused at times, and it has been. The whole idea of the show must go on is a wonderful sentiment that I think sometimes people in a younger generation don't quite understand. But film, theatre, TV sort of thrives and survives on it. However, that people who have sort of believe in that kind of mantra as well, because it's really rewarding to be involved in that. When no matter what's happened, the show must go on. It's almost religious. Do you know what I mean?
Mm.
But it can be abused as well. Because it's like, yeah, you haven't been paid. Yeah, half the crew have got hypothermia. Yeah, you've been fed food that's giving you dysentery, but the show must go on. And you're like, wait a minute, must it? Must it? So, yeah, so that's a wonderful thing. So the independent cinema survives on that. I hope our film wasn't too much like that for our people. We had an incredible crew, and just they gave everything. And every time I didn't have an answer, they were there to help come up with that answer and sort of improve what I had in my head at times. And just so grateful to them for that.
Mm, yeah. And California Scheming obviously just launched at Toronto. I know it's sort of closing Zurich. What's sort of next for the film after that? When can we see it in UK cinemas, that kind of thing?
You need to speak to Studio Canal. So yeah, we just did TIFF, went really, really well. We are closing Zurich. We're doing Rome. I think we're doing Dinard, and I think we're doing a few others as well. We are meant to be coming out in this country at some point, first half of next year. Distribution in America will have a say on that, so I can't give you. There's a slot that Studio Canal want to release it in, but there's a discussion to have with when the rest of the distribution worldwide falls into place. Yeah, at some point, hopefully in the first half of next year. Really excited to get it in front of audience because it plays so well for a crowd, and they're with it every step of the way, which I'm really proud of. So yeah, that's what's happening there.
Great. Well, I'm really excited to see it. And if the listeners want to hear any more about James's debut, California Scheming, you can read his interview with Jeremy Kay on screendaily.com. But for now, thank you so much, James, for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
I'm now going to talk to Jeremy Kay, who is Screen's America's editor. He is back home in LA now, but he recently spent a very fruitful few days at Toronto 2025. And if you haven't already read Jeremy's great 5 takeaways from TIFF, do that on Screen Daily. We're going to get further into some of those topics today. So, Jeremy, you wrote that, there were only a handful of deals, or I should probably say less than a hand, a few fingers, one appendage or something, done at TIFF that we know about so far. And should the festival be worried about that? Should the wider industry be worried about that?
Yeah, hi, Wen. Good to see you. Yeah, there have been a pinky of deals, to continue your analogy. When we were in Toronto, this new distributor, Row K, which is backed by a company called MCT and is led by a Hollywood veteran, Megan Colligan, who worked at IMAX and Paramount, they bought this Gus Van Sant movie that premiered in Venice called Dead Man's Wire, which stars Bill Skarsgård, and they're going to release that later this year, and there may be some awards play there, I'm told. And then when we got back from Toronto earlier this week, Row K also bought another film in the festival, which is a romance called Charlie Harper. And the big headline in Toronto was Focus Features, who I gather are still in exclusive talks to buy this Midnight Madness horror called Obsession. They're going to buy most of the world, and I think that film played gangbusters in Midnight Madness. And speaking of new distributors, there's another company called Black Bear, which we all know, Teddy Schwartzman's company, and they've recently launched a US distribution division. And they took a few films to Toronto that they'd financed and produced and were selling internationally. And one of them is this Sydney Sweeney boxing biopic called Christie, which played well in Toronto where it had its world premiere, and they've decided to take on US rights on that too. We're hearing that 1-2 Special, which is this really cool new art house distributor that launched earlier this year and has been buying a few films out of Cannes, like Harris Dickinson's Urchin, have just bought another Toronto world premiere starring Charlie XCX called A Rupture, which is some kind of wild coming-of-age romance movie, more like a sexy sort of coming-of-age film set in Poland. So lots going on there. That said, there haven't been that many on-site deals, and this has been something that we've seen at festivals for the last few years. It's been, and I mean US deals, they're much more cautious, the US buyers these days. If I were Toronto, I would be concerned because they're launching TIFF Market later next year, which we'll talk about later in the conversation, and you want to see US deals. at your festival because they still trigger international sales. There's always exceptions. We've seen films snapped up quickly in Cannes, and there always will be deals that come together quite quickly on site. But by and large, US buyers are much more cautious, so it takes longer. But it's important to say that within the context of the industry, these deals happen year round. You've got US buyers who are increasingly pre-buying, putting money into films, getting involved earlier. So there is a steady flow, but I think everybody would like to see more deals at the markets and festivals. And on that note, we'll keep on updating sales and deals as they're announced on Screen Daily, so keep on checking in there.
You've already mentioned TIFF the Market, which sounds like a sort of sequel. I love it. This is the new market that Toronto is going to introduce in 2026. They have nearly 17 million US dollars from the Canadian government to start this market. People are really curious about what it's going to be. What sort of feedback were you hearing on the ground? Because I know the TIFF team was giving potential exhibitors a little sales tour, but yet they're not really telling people exactly where this market is going to land. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. There was a little pop-up in downtown near where the festival takes place and near TIFF Lightbox, the festival HQ and all the theatres. And they were inviting potential exhibitors in. Press weren't allowed in, despite a few valiant efforts. Didn't work. And I think they also had a meet and greet one night when they were talking to commercial teams from various outlets. But my sense is people don't know enough about this yet. And you ask people and they say, well, we don't know. And we're going to be writing a more in-depth piece about this at Screen probably the next week or so.
Great.
But people don't really seem to know because the situation as it is at the moment is TIFF is really a screening festival. Lots of films there, lots of films from award season are coming there. And if you're a seller, it's a good place to show the world premiere, the North American premiere, what have you, of a film that you've sold to your buyers and have them all come in and look at it in front of an audience for the first time. Great venue for that. And the sellers do bring sales packages, but really on an opportunistic basis. If they've got something they think it'll work, they'll do it. But there's no sense of compulsion to do that you'd find in AFM, Cannes, EFM, Film Art. So people are playing a wait and see game. But it's really hard to find out what's happening. TIFF themselves are not telling us too much about it.
Yeah, I mean, I've just been hearing a few whispers that people aren't necessarily happy with the kinds of prices they think they're going to be charged to be exhibiting. I've talked to even some sort of like public institutes from Europe who usually go and I think are quite worried they're going to be sort of shunted off to this potential convention center that we don't know.
Yeah. Well, we don't. I mean, I've suspected it's going to be the Metro Toronto Convention Centre, which is just within a 15-minute walk of TIFF Lightbox, down near where CBC is and where they currently hold the industry conference. And it's important to note, that it's not just a sales market. It's going to be immersive and AI and new media and co-productions, all the whole shebang. We have heard ominous grumbles about the costs. And if you're a seller and you are already taking up an office in the Soho Hotel or the Hyatt Regency right by Lightbox, why do you need to spend more money? Why do you want to pay money for a badge? I mean, I get it. Toronto wants to make money out of this thing. But there's a lot that needs to be worked out. I don't think people really know quite yet what's going to happen.
Yeah, and also I'm very curious. Toronto has a big film program, as we know. And if you try to lump on, are they going to try to lump on, 100 market screenings on top of that? 200 market screenings? I mean, who's going to have time for this?
Yeah, exactly. You talk to buyers, you talk to domestic buyers, and they could just about cover all the films they wanted to see to acquire. And on top of that, that's a big ask.
So as we said, we do wish Toronto well. It's a festival we all know is very important in this ecosystem, and we're curious to hear more about the market. So we'll be keeping close tabs on that. But how do you think this could impact, especially the market calendar, and especially for the autumn? Because obviously you've got Venice, which doesn't have a market but has an industry side, and the production bridge. You've got Busan that's moved a little bit earlier this year. And then you sort of have festivals like San Sebastian, LFF, Zurich. Those aren't really market festivals. But then you do have the AFM, which is coming back to LA this year. People are very excited. It's not going to be in Vegas again. But how could if Toronto's market really succeeds, could it kill off the AFM? Am I being a bit dramatic there? Can they both coexist?
Yeah, no, there's no drama at all. I remember asking TIFF CEO Cameron Bailey this question last year. Are you trying to knock out AFM? And he said no. And of course he'd say that. And I understand that. And maybe they're not. TIFF just needs to find a way of bringing more buyers and sellers into Toronto and just trying to make this market happen as a way of really using this federal funding and making more money for their year-round activities. But of course there'll be an impact. It's really hard to see how there wouldn't be. And I understand that Toronto sort of gamed out moving their dates back a little bit in the month. But then you get closer to San Sebastian, you come into a whole other ecosystem, it gets closer to AFM. As it is now, it's early?
And New York Film Festival as well, too. I forgot to mention that
absolutely.
one, which is very important launchpad. Yeah.
Absolutely, Wen, absolutely. Very important. So the way it is now, it's, first, second week of September works quite well. And I think it benefits Toronto to be in that sort of trifecta with Telluride and Venice, the early fourth season trifecta. I spoke to some sales agents who were saying, look, if this TIFF market takes off, we can bring a film, we can do a soft launch on a package and start talking. And then when more elements come together, we can start the hard sell at AFM. Others have said it's good to have more markets, the more the merrier. We're all there together. It generates business, creates momentum. It's a year-round business, of course, as we know. And it just does come very close to AFM. And as you say, AFM is back in LA. They've had their troubles over the last few years. And we'll see how that goes. Look, we wish them all well. We want everything to succeed. But there is going to be a bit of a logjam. And it's curious to see how it's going to play out.
Yeah, and I'm very curious to see what's going to happen next year when all of these are trying to fit together and the puzzle pieces that we know so well. Just also to mention Charles Tremblay, who is a former Mubi and Mongrel Media exec, is in charge of the market. I heard a little bit of positive industry feedback in Venice about him. I don't know him personally. Were you hearing much that people think he's a good hire?
I don't know him either, Wendy. I've heard from people who say they don't really know him. Some of the Americans, others say, yep, sounds good. Again, it's another unknown, I mean, he must have been chosen because he's got quality, he's got a track record. But I think, again, it's a wait and see. The whole thing is shrouded in mystery. We want to know more.
Okay. Well, Jeremy, I'll trust you to keep reporting more all the time. You have a year to let us know what's really going to happen at TIFF : the market. So let's talk a little bit about the films. And I wanted to mostly talk, there's lots of reviews people can read on Screen Daily, but Hamnet, Chloe Zhao's new film, won the People's Choice Award. And just to get your reaction on TIFF as an awards season launchpad, and has that been working? Does this sort of guarantee Hamnet's awards run later this year?
I wouldn't say anything is a guarantee, but what TIFF has become is an endorser. It's not necessarily the place where you're going to get the most of the shiniest world premieres. That is Venice and increasingly Cannes in the last few years. Telluride, New York is stepping up as well in that area. Toronto has its world premieres, but I think it's safe to say that this year, the biggest films were probably the ones that had played at other festivals, but were coming to Toronto, which is perfectly legitimate. It's a public-facing festival. These fans, the Torontonians, are absolutely fanatical about films. And the TIFF People's Choice Award, I think, is a really strong endorsement. It is a very significant award. I understand that Hamnet came out of Telluride and all the talk was that it's an excellent film. Jessie Buckley became like an early season front runner for lead actress Oscar. And TIFF just endorses that, seems to broaden its appeal. The public loved it. They showed it 3 times. There were sellout screenings. And we know historically that if you get this award, it's a really strong bellwether. Something like 13 out of the last 15 winners in the last 15 years have gone on to get a Best Picture nomination. Some have won, like Green Book, 12 Years a Slave, Chloe Zhao's Nomadland 5 years ago. So it's a real stamp of approval, and I think Focus Features, who've got the film, must be delighted.
But I'm not sure that last year's audience winner, which was The Life of Chuck, which was kind of a surprise winner, I think in the UK, at least, I think for BAFTA, that's going to go in this year's race, but it does not feel like a leading contender. Do you know for Oscar, is Life of Chuck this year, or would it have been last year?
No, it would be this year because it was just released recently by Neon. It wasn't one of their highest performing films. It did okay, but no, I think that's one of the that's an example of a film that I imagine will not go far into award season. And honestly, I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, but Neon have got such a busy dance card. I don't think that's one of their priorities, frankly.
Yeah. I think here in the UK, we could see some BAFTA love for Tom Hiddleston because people adore him, and that dance is something special. So we'll see. But, thank you, Jeremy. We really appreciate your insight into Toronto 2025, and we'll stay in touch as all of this starts to unfold, and as you're going to be hearing a lot more about TIFF the Market coming in 26.
Great to see you. Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Screen Podcast. We got a lot of great feedback on our first relaunched episode earlier in September, so we really appreciate that. Big thanks to the whole team at Screen International, especially our podcast editor, Ellie Calnan, and web editor, Orlando Parfit. Our next episode will drop on October 9th, so please do tune in again.